All right, it's the guys over here at the Black Hills Project again, and today we are going to talk about passive aiming, what that is, if it's useful, and if it's something that you should be doing. So, do you want to just talk about first what passive aiming is?
Yeah, so passive aiming is essentially just shooting through whatever kind of aiming device you have, be it most likely it'll be a red dot or a EOTech or something like that, a holographic. Technically, you can do it with something like a ACOG or an LPVO, but it's very difficult and you're going to be messing with parallax. So we're not even going to discuss magnified optics at this on this one, but we will talk about red dots and EOTechs and hollows and stuff like that. But essentially, that's what
And
it is.
and to clarify, this is all with we're talking about through night vision.
Correct. Yep.
So yeah, passive aiming is aiming through an optic as opposed to using a laser when shooting with night vision.
Yep. So
So I guess the first thing we should talk about is why. Um, Basically, with as prolific as night vision is becoming, which it may not seem like it, but compared to I don't know, what would you say 3 years ago, night
yeah,
vision is way more common. Like there's just way more people with it. Um, it's passive aiming is becoming more important just because if you're throwing an IR signature out there like an IR laser and an IR illuminator, and you're talking about a say like a civil unrest situation or something like that, anyone else with night vision is going to be seeing that from literally miles away. So you're really broadcasting your location.
yep.
So that's kind of the why passive aiming has become more talked about recently.
Yeah, it's something that I think is important, but um, you also don't want to discredit lasers either and illumination. Um, from what I have noticed, and we can get into this a little bit more later, but from what I've noticed, even when you're passive aiming, you generally need some kind of illumination just to be able to light up what you're actually aiming at, regardless of how good the light transmission is in your on your glass for your red dot or hollow or whatever you're using.
Yeah, so that's a thing that a lot of people that haven't used a lot of night vision don't realize is that even if you're even if you do have night vision, that night vision still needs some kind of ambient light to amplify. That's how night vision works, is it amplifies the ambient light that's there. So if you don't have any ambient light, you're still going to have to use some kind of illuminator. And even if you do have some ambient light that you're working with, once you add looking through some glass and losing some light through that, a lot of times you will need some kind of IR illuminator. So it's passive aiming is not as easy as some people make it out to be. It's not just oh, I just look through my optic and it's just like shooting in the day. There's a little more to it than that, and we're gonna kind of talk about that as well. But
Yep.
something that I do tell a lot of people when you're first building your gun, and it's something that someone told me that's helped me out a lot too. Is when I first bought my optic and my light for my first gun, they told me, hey, if you're ever going to plan on getting night vision, get an optic that's night vision compatible and get a they recommended that I get the Surefire vampire light so that I would have an IR illuminator as well. And that allowed me, once I did get my night vision, is I could shoot passively, and I did have that IR illuminator. And so while I saved for that laser, which is a pretty big investment, I still could do that passive aiming. So that's one thing that I recommend for a lot of people too, is passive aiming, while it's not as easy as using a laser, can be really nice early on in your night vision experience because you can still shoot with your night vision without investing in that laser.
Yep. And it's something that, like you mentioned previously, it's inherently cheaper than buying a laser. There's only a couple lasers on the market that I personally could recommend that are cheaper than an optic. But at the same time, when you're doing all this stuff, you're going to buy an optic anyways. So might as well put the money into the optic first and then save up for the laser later, because I've done the whole laser with the illuminator built into it, and that's not fun at all. Not until you actually experience what a good illuminator can do, like the vampire head. Or now I have the Kiji, the 3 degree Kiji, and I haven't used it as much as I'd like to. But I know that it's a very good illuminator, and it's something that I won't take for granted anymore. I don't think I would recommend anybody buying a civilian laser and just expect to use the illuminator built into it. It's not it's not the best in the world, and it's not one of those things where you can just get by. It's not good. So,
Yeah, basically, unless you're talking full power lasers, which are expensive and you can't warranty them, or possibly, I haven't really played with the mall illuminators, but they're supposed to be pretty good,
mhm.
or maybe a D2, a Steiner D2. Those are really the only things that you're going to be able to get by with the illuminator on it.
Yep.
Any other civilian, like the ATPLs, the Steiner, um, what
The
was
the D-ball I2 and the A2
yep,
both
and
have
the
pretty
A3.
awful. Yep, they all have pretty awful illumination on them because they're civvies, they're civvy
Yep.
units, and for whatever reason, the government decided that you can't, or the FDA, I guess they're not really whatever. They decided that there's a specific limit that civilians can actually have legally without having to go through some kind of black market. So
Right. So yeah, basically, if you're going to do any kind of shooting that's not like within a room, you're going to want a separate IR illuminator. And the point we're kind of making with that is that even if you're going to be passive aiming, it can be really difficult to passive aim without giving out some kind of IR signature to have that light to see. So it can be counterintuitive at that point, because the whole point of passive aiming is to not give off an IR signature. But don't be expect unless you have like a night vision clip on, don't expect to be shooting hundreds of yards while passive
right,
aiming.
it's just not, even with the laser, it's really not feasible. You're not
No.
really going to be shooting night vision further than maybe 100, maybe 200 yards, maybe, without
Right.
a clip on. So it's a lot of closer engagements that you'd be using any kind of
Yeah.
night vision for.
And if you're talking about like a civil unrest situation, basically if you suspect that the opposing force, or whatever you want to call it, has night vision, you'd want to use passive aiming up until, maybe the first few minutes of the engagement's over, and then they're going to know where you're at anyways. So it's kind of a moot point at that point. Even though that if you do activate a laser, it's going to be leading straight back towards you. Once they know where you're at, it's going to be way easier and more intuitive to aim with a laser than it is passive. So
Yeah, and that's another thing you can't forget, that is that the lasers are like way easier to shoot with and aim with and everything. It's not the same as a visible laser where you just don't even want to bother shooting with something like that. IR lasers are very much the easiest way to shoot with night vision. And that's just, it's not it's not really a debated thing. The thing that's debated is whether or not you should even use it, because who knows what you're going up against and what their capabilities are. And that's another point that I don't know if we can go into now or if we can go into later, but you have to understand what you would be going up against in this scenario, whatever it would be. Um, so you just it's it's a trade off for sure, but you
yeah,
have to realize and you have to understand what that trade off would actually be.
yeah. So this is probably a good point to kind of transition and talk about the different stuff we've tried with passive aiming. And we've both tried different things and have been able to try each other's gear. So we've tried Aimpoint, EOTech, Hollow Sun. I've got the RMR on top of my ACOG. We've looked through the ACOGs. We've looked through LPVOs. I've looked a little bit through, like when I had a 2 to 10, I looked a little bit through that. We've tried different heights. We've tried like with different mounts with the T1s and T2s, different heights mounted with the RMR. But yeah, we can just talk a little bit about the different setups we've tried on rifles, and then after that we could try and talk about on pistols as well.
Yeah, so with rifles, I've tried. My main one that I used for about a year was EOTech EXPS3. That is undoubtedly the best you can get for passive. It's not even really a contest. It's the best. The circle dot reticle, the light transmission through the glass. It's it's the best. And if anybody tells you otherwise, just point them to any video by like Hop or Brass Facts or somebody like that. They do extensive testing. I don't necessarily agree with everything that they say, but in terms of the red dots and passive aiming, I do agree with what they have to say in that sense. Also because I've used the EOTech, the Aimpoint T2, the Aimpoint T1, the RMR, the RMO6, I believe it's what it's called. I've tried the 509T X2, and again, like things like the LPVOs and ACOGs and MPVOs. I won't even talk about those because they're not even worth bringing up. You shouldn't ever use some kind of magnified optic, in my opinion, that has additional parallax that could change your point of impact. It's and the only one to really use is a clip on that you sit there and actually set up for that specific optic. So sticking with one times optics like that.
Yeah, so I'd pretty much agree. The EOTech has a nice large window, and the circle dot's really easy to pick up under the night vision. So with that large window and that glass, you lose very little light transmission through it, so it's really great for night vision use. I believe you used that with and without that Unity riser, and I mean I don't think it was really. I think it was.
Yeah, the Unity riser is definitely preferred for night vision. It brings it up to
Yeah.
2.26 inches, I believe, instead of the 1/3 height. And I know a lot of people think it looks silly to have the optics so high up, but there's a reason behind it. And it really does make a huge difference in how you aim with passive night vision or passive aiming with night vision. It's it can look silly for sure, and all these new mounts that are way higher than even the Unity T2 mounts and the EOTech risers. They look very silly. Some of them are more practical than others, but there is a reason for them being that high. It's for passive night vision aiming, and if you don't have night vision, the I would say that the highest I would shoot, just because I'm so used to it now, is about the Unity, whatever the Unity height. I believe it's 2.26 inches. I've gotten used to that at this point, but I would, if I wasn't shooting night vision, I'd probably still stay at the 1/3 or probably the 193 height. I would stay at
Yeah.
that. 193 is probably the universally like best height for an optic, but nobody really makes a 193 EOTech. They only make
Hmm.
the 1/3 EOTech, which is the EXPS3. You can buy the Scalarworks mount for the T2 or T1.
Yep.
So
And that's the thing. There's a lot of companies pushing these high mounts now as like, well, you can get on the gun faster because you don't have to bring your head as far down to the optic. Like, well, no, that's not really a real reason. Like, you can
yeah,
get
I mean
down on
it's
a lower
true,
third.
but yeah, you can still
Well,
do it just as
I mean,
fast.
is it though? How much time are you saving from a
Well, fair enough.
226 to a?
Fair
I mean,
enough. Yeah.
so like don't buy into that height. The only reason to really get like an aftermarket really high optic mount is if you're wanting to passive aim with night vision, which is and then it's a good reason. But
Yeah.
basically what makes that the purpose behind it is because you have that tube hanging off the front of your face, it's hard to get down on a rifle. It's not like you're going to get a full cheek weld. So a higher mount allows you to kind of just get a high mount on your shoulder with that uh, pistol brace or stock or whatever you have, and just look through that optic without having to really like tilt your head down around to the side or something like that.
Yeah, I mean,
And
you'll never get a full cheek weld when you're passive aiming, so don't expect to
no,
do something like that. It's the
yeah,
high mounts will never allow you to get a full cheek. Just the night vision in general will never let you get a full cheek weld. So
exactly.
you're
Yep.
essentially just floating around waiting to, or not waiting, but you're essentially just floating around looking for the reticle and using that
Yeah.
as your aiming device. So
Commonly known as the chin weld.
yes, the
But
chin weld.
yeah, so the EOTech, I think we pretty much agree, is probably the easiest to use. I mean, I wouldn't say that the aim points are bad.
No,
It's just a smaller window, so it's not quite as intuitive, and I think you do lose a little bit more light transmission through it because you got that tube.
right.
But
I mean, the difference between a EOTech, which is a holographic sight, versus a T2, which don't, that's what I run now, the T2. I used to run the EOTech, but I run the T2 now, is it's just because it's an actual red dot and you have to have tilted glass and there has to be a slight tint to it to get the color that you need and all these different
right,
things. Whereas with an EOTech, it's just a hologram. So the glass doesn't need to be tilted. It doesn't need to be tinted in any way. So you get better light transmission just in principle. But the T2 is still just almost as good as the EOTech. It's not,
right,
there's not a huge difference. It's just in the, they're just little tiny things. So you can't
yep,
go wrong with either of them.
yeah. And then so there's also like the HoloSun offerings. I obviously haven't tried every one of their 1,500 different models, but the ones I have used for passive aiming, I should clarify, they're rifle optics. Their rifle optics, I was not a huge fan of with passive aiming just because of the glass quality of them. You lost a lot of light transmission through them, so they were more difficult to use. Still not impossible, but
You definitely
you
need
can,
more illumination with those.
yeah, you definitely tell a difference between like a T2 and a HoloSun.
Yep.
Um, then there's stuff like I haven't used like an MRO under with passive aiming or anything like that, but there is stuff like that out there.
Yeah, but I don't even think I'd ever recommend an MRO. So,
No, I wouldn't either, just because of a number of other issues. But
yep.
then you have options like mounting a smaller dot like a RMR or like a 509T or something like that on top of your day optic, which is what I'm currently running as the RMR on top of the ACOG. And that's also a great option because you don't have to sacrifice having some kind of magnification during your day I'm sorry, for your day optic, but you can still have that passive aiming on top and a red dot for up close shooting during the day. And it also puts it at a really nice height right off the bat for passive aiming. And I think the RMR is a great optic for passive aiming on a rifle or a pistol, just because the sides of the optic are small enough and the window's clear enough that when you passive aim with it, you really don't see the RMR per se. Once you
Mm-hmm.
get it in position, you kind of just see that dot floating out there, and you just you do your thing. So
Yeah, the
that's an
first time I used an RMR, it felt like I was just using a laser instead of an
yeah,
actual
yep,
optic.
yep, 100%. And that's a great because, like you said, the you can look through an ACOG pretty decently with night vision, but I would not shoot through it. I'd basically just observe through it with illumination if that was needed. But LPVOs and anything higher than that for scopes is basically unusable. So if you are wanting to run like an LPVO or like a 2 to 10 or even a higher magnification scope on your rifle, and you want to throw a T2 or an RMR or a whatever dot on there, that is a good option. We did talk a little bit in the last video too. If you are wanting to passive aim in that way, you're going to want to top mount. Canted mount with passive aiming is basically unusable. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, it's I've sacrificed that on my 14.5. And again, I might switch to a top mount, but it's offsets just don't work no matter what. It doesn't. So
Yeah.
don't even think that you're going to be passive aiming if you want an offset.
Yeah, so to kind of summarize rifles, like I said, I do encourage people, even if you think maybe night vision's a few years down the road for you, spend the money now and get a good optic that you will be able to passive aim through when you do get the night vision, just because you're going to be saving the money of purchasing a new optic when you do, because I think passive aiming is a tool worth having, even if it's just a redundancy for if your laser fails. There's really not a lot of civilian lasers on the market that are actually extremely durable. We've had a lot of problems with a lot of the ones we've used. So even as a redundancy for that, it's worth having that backup. So,
Yep.
but yeah, that's if you have anything else to say about rifles, or we can go on to talk about pistols a little bit as well.
Yeah, we can talk about pistols. I'm good on rifles.
So we've both run RMRs for a long time, and now we've both tried out the 509T. I will say I've had zero issues with the RMR. We used all three models of RMR. We've used the dual power. We've used the battery powered auto adjust. I don't know the model numbers, and then we've used just the normal adjustable one. They all actually work great under night vision. They all have different issues and qualities during daytime use, but for night vision, they all work great in my opinion.
Yeah, I'd still just suggest getting the adjustable one though. I wouldn't mess with any of the other
Yeah,
ones.
I would agree with that. Just for daytime and low light use, you're gonna want the adjustment.
Yeah, I mean,
Uh,
the only issue that you might have, like you said, is that you have to just manually adjust it, which is really not that big of a deal. And that's the only drawback I can see with that specific model. So I would just get
yeah,
that
and
one.
it's better to be able to adjust it than not be able to.
Exactly.
So I haven't had a lot of time on the 509T with the night vision yet, but I can tell already that I do like the option of having the circle dot, basically the EOTech reticle in it for night vision use, because if you're not really consistent with your presentation with a red dot on a pistol, you can find yourself fishing for that under the night vision. And that circle dot kind of gives you edges of reference that you're going to catch faster than just a center dot. So if you, I mean, obviously, ideally, in a perfect world, my presentation would be perfect every time, and I'd see the dot right away, and I'd be able to start shooting. But sometimes that doesn't happen. So that circle dot can be an advantage there. It does also, cover up more of your target, and it's more light inside that optic. So you're gonna probably end up wanting a little more illumination with that. But other than that, I have appreciated that optic for it so far.
Right. I think that the 509T is actually a really good optic for night vision use, especially with that circle dot. Like you said, anything enclosed at this point is going to be probably really good for night vision use just because it's not as tinted as the other, like the RMR or the Delta Point, or even
Yeah,
if you want to say the EOTech or whatever that thing is called. Um,
and I don't
so,
think either of us have much time behind like an SRO or a Delta Point or some of the other I'm sorry, Holosun offerings, and there is the new EOTech dot as well. We don't have time behind those, so I personally can't speak to them. I know the SRO and Delta Point both have a good reputation. Um, but
they
yeah,
have
I
a good
can't really.
reputation, but they're not duty rated, so that's why I've stayed away from them.
Right. Yep. You're not getting the durability that you are out of, say, the RMR or the 509T. And if you're looking at pistol dots, Sage Dynamics on YouTube does amazing videos. That's where we get most of our information, or at least I get most of my information. He does extremely thorough tests on durability with them, and usually does some decent night vision passive aiming, passive shooting with them as well, and gives feedback on that. So if you're looking at pistol dots and you're concerned about passive aiming with them, definitely go check out and see if he has a video on them, which he probably does.
Yeah,
So
he's got a lot, and his definition of durability testing is dropping them on concrete from like 6 feet up. So
yeah, and racking them off
it's
4x4s.
yep. So I think he does a pretty good job at explaining and demonstrating that.
Yeah, I was definitely hesitant to switch from an RMR to try out the 509T, but basically, basically if he gives it a green light, I know that it's been torture tested beyond probably what I'll use it for, so that gave me the confidence to do that.
Yep.
Um, so do we want to talk a little bit about lasers as a contrast to passive aiming, or do you want to save that for a different video?
We can talk about it really quickly. There's, uh, like I said in the last video, very briefly, the debate whether or not you should use a laser or any kind of illumination is being changed and just debated every single day. It changes every day. I believe that it depends on where you're at, but also the main argument is, oh, there's so many people getting into night vision now, and like they're going to see you and all that. And while that is true, you have to remember how many people actually, like how many gun owners there actually are in America, and how many people are actually buying night vision. So if you take, and this is the roughest of rough estimates that I can give anybody, but, and this is purely based off of Facebook group analytics, but the largest group that I'm in has roughly 32,000 members in it. And again, you got to take that with a grain of salt, but 32,000, and maybe not all those guys have night vision either, is a tiny percentage in the actual total amount of gun owners in America. So if you're talking about military versus civilians, then that's a different story. But if you're just talking about defending property or something like that, then that's another story altogether. It's very convoluted and situational based, I think, and you're never going to know exactly what the situation is going to be until you're in it. So you kind of,
Right.
it's better to have, in my opinion, where I'm going with this is better to have both and have both options available to you, because
Exactly.
it's just, you never know. It's redundancy is the biggest thing to me.
Yep. That's the biggest thing, is to train with both and be, fairly confident with both. But again, like he said, the biggest thing for me after some of the issues we've had with lasers was just redundancy. Like if that laser goes down, I still want a way to be able to shoot with night vision,
Without having to
and
go to white light.
without having to go to white light and use my optic, right? And we can talk real quick about some of the lasers out there, and about, I just wanted to touch on basically high power lasers versus civi power lasers, because I feel like a lot of people have the idea in their head that they need a high power or a full power laser, which having played with some high power lasers and full power lasers, I really don't feel outgunned with the civi power laser. It's the full power illuminator that is
Yeah.
where the benefit is. Being able to have that much power behind your illuminator and then dial it up and down, like say on a full power PEC 15, that is where the value is, not really in the laser. I mean, I can shine my civi laser, 800 yards, no problem. So
Yeah,
it's
we've tested this. The lasers aren't the issue; it's the
yep.
illuminator. That's why
So
something like the mall is so it's such a huge deal, because the mall, it's not, whereas the way that the mall works, and in turn the Kiji that I have works, is it's not an actual LED light being shined through a like a flashlight head. It's literally a laser being expanded upon. Where when I say I have the 3-degree Kiji, it means that it's being the actual beam of the laser is being expanded by 3 degrees. So that's
right.
why they're able to get away with such high power, quote unquote, illuminators, is because it's not actually an illuminator. It's just a laser that's being expanded upon. So
Yeah.
that's why it's so good. And that's why people are drooling over the malls, because they work so well compared to an i2 or an AppPLC, because the AppPLC and the i2 actually use just IR LED nodes or diodes. So
Yeah, and they're probably good to what, 30. I don't think you could even shoot to 50 yards with that
no,
illuminator.
I'd say 20 yards, maybe 25.
Yeah, they're just
It's not good. I would never ever suggest somebody buy the i2 or the AppPLC without some kind of additional illumination.
yeah, whether that's a Surefire Vampire or an Arasaka, a Mod Light, a Kiji, whatever, you're gonna, and that goes for shooting with a laser or passive aiming. you're still going to want some kind of IR illumination with your night vision, period.
Most likely, yes.
And that's like having it on your rifle, having it on your helmet. They're both invaluable.
Mhm.
So, and that's something that you should plan on budgeting it in when you're looking at a night vision purchase.
Yeah, night vision is not cheap. It's
no.
It
the,
might
and
look
the unit is only part of the cost.
exactly. You look at it and you say, "Oh, it's $2,500 for a PVS 14. Darn, that's a lot of money." Or that's not that much money, depending on what your financial situation is, right? But you have to factor in a quality mount, a quality helmet, on which is, if you say quality mount, quality helmet, the bare minimum for a helmet is, I'd say, a Team Windy LTP bump helmet. A quality mount, I would never skimp on a mount. I think that the best mount that you can get is the G24 by Wilcox. Then also, if you're getting just a PVS 14, then you have to factor in the J arm to actually mount it to the mount, or the G24. So that's another, depending on what you go with. If you go with something like the Wilcox J arm, that's $200 and something. If you go with the Noise Fighter, which I suggest you do because it's better, that one is like 150, 170 or something like that. So you're just adding all these things up on top of it, on top of a red dot that you can use with night vision modes, a laser, and a good illuminator. You're up to like $5,000-$6,000 just to be able to shoot at night, which is worth it, but it's a lot of money, and you don't. When I say $5,000 to $6,000, but I initially said that the unit only costs $2,500 or so, that adds up very, very quickly. So you have to budget for that, and you have to do enough research to where you're comfortable with spending that money down the line, because you will be spending that money down the line. No matter what anybody else says, you will be spending that money.
Yeah. And you can spread those purchases out to some point. It's just the fact that a lot of people buy their PVS 14 and they're like, oh, now what? Like, I'm standing here holding it. I can't shoot with it. I can't mount it on my head. Like, it's just something to be aware of. But
Yeah,
we can do a fully separate video and talk about like night vision accessories and what we like, what we don't like, what you should plan to buy. If that's something that interests people, we could do a fully separate video on that. But
yeah, I think the last thing we should just do is suggestions on what we use, and then probably wrap it up here.
Yeah, so yeah, like we said, for my rifle, I'm using a RMR on top of my ACOG right now, just so I'm not sacrificing a little bit of magnification for daytime use. But basically, what I would recommend from what I have used, I would recommend an EOTech, a T2, or a T2 for a standalone red dot optic, and I would recommend an RMR or a 509T if you're piggybacking an optic. Based on my experience, that's what I can recommend.
Yep. What laser?
So for lasers, currently I would recommend the Phantom Hill.
Mm-hmm.
We've had a lot of experiences with many different Steiners, and I'm running the App PLC. I've played a little bit with some of the Holosun lasers, and they seem okay, but I definitely think the Phantom Hill is the best bang for the buck that's on the market right now.
Yep, and that's what I'll say. I currently own the Phantom Hill, the CTF2. It's the best I've ever used, like no contest. The unit is fully standalone, so you have your white light, your IR laser, and your IR illuminator completely built into it. The setup is super, super nice. You can move it from gun to gun and not lose much of a zero because it's a center bore laser, which is the only one on the market that does that. And yeah, that's about all I'd actually recommend nowadays, unless you're trying to be like a cloner, then get an App PLC or a full power pack.
Well, and it's also cheaper than basically everything, but maybe the Holosuns. So yeah, it's kind of a no-brainer.
With the full setup, if you can find them, because it's a one-man show and he's the only one building them. Actually, if it goes live today, if this podcast goes live today on the 11th of December, he's doing another drop tonight, and I don't know if I'll be able to get it edited tonight or not. But if it does, then if you want one, go to his website. He's going to be dropping them. I think it's like 7 p.m. Eastern is about when he's doing it. And then, yeah, I think the entire setup with the E1 HT light head, and then the Kiji 3-degree head is $13.99, I believe, which is cheaper than the app peel, and that's all enclosed, right? You got to remember that. That's with your white light, that's with your laser, that's with your IR head, with the buttons for like your tape switch. So if you're gonna add that up to what a like an app PLC would be, the equivalent of that, that's what, $1,400 retail right now still.
The app PL I think is going for like 13, but
Okay,
that's
so
with
13.
that's without your white light or your pressure switch.
Yep. So that's 13. Your pressure switch is $150 if you want the sync, which is what you want, the Unity sync, because that lets you turn your white light and your laser on at the same time, which you want. If you get your white light, which is like a Vampire, which that's like $350, then you need a mount, that's another $50, so that's $400. So you're up to like $2,000 for something that doesn't even mimic the performance of the Phantom Hill, because the Phantom Hill has a Kiji head, which is like miles better than anything on the market.
And you're sacrificing your white light to have that Vampire head. Like, you're sacrificing a better white light head to have the Vampire head.
Yeah, the Vampire head's not great for white light. It's awesome for IR, but it's not the best.
I would say it's adequate for both is the way I would describe it.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's what I'd say. I'm not really running anything passive right now. I'm still running the offset. I might end up swapping to, I've been toying around with swapping to an Acro, or the Acro P2, I believe is what it's called, and top mounting that. I just don't think that I want to top mount a full size T2 on my gun right now, because it's not huge, but it's just a little cumbersome. I don't want it to be super tall, so I'm still messing around with that idea. So,
yeah, I guess to wrap it up, I guess what I would say is I would strongly consider, if you are using night vision and you are setting your rifle up, I would strongly consider having a passive aiming option on there. If nothing else than for the redundancy of lasers, which are a finicky piece of kit.
Yep.
And so yeah, even if I wouldn't run out and sell everything you own to make sure you have passive aiming capability, but I would strongly recommend considering having that option.
I agree. It's an important thing to consider when you're doing night vision. So.
Yep. So yeah, I guess that's all we've got for today. If you guys want to hear more about other night vision topics or different kit or gear, let us know. And if you don't have anything else, we'll catch you guys next time.
Yep. Let us know, and we'll get right on it. So, I guess we'll just see you guys in the next one.
Sounds good.
See you.